Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with Test School and Life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to discuss today is the demographic cliff is here. But first, let's meet our special guest, Jon Marcus.
Jon Marcus is the higher education editor at the Hechinger Report and also writes for the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wired, NPR, and other magazines, newspapers, and websites. Jon holds a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University and a bachelor's degree from Bates College and attended Oxford University. He teaches journalism at Boston College and Northeastern University. Welcome.
Thank you for having me back.
Jon, it is great to have you back. You first joined us in episode 201. Amy, that was a long time ago.
Long time ago.
To discuss how College Board and ACT are changing. This time we're shifting to another, maybe even more important topic. Before we dive into that, Jon, I'd love for you to share with readers a bit about your bio and the particular stories you love tracking down.
So I cover several beats, but primarily higher education. It's a fascinating beat with lots of job security because there are so many problems. And higher education also tends not to disappoint us. It never solves the problems. So we tend to be talking about and writing about the same things over and over again. And we are at as you suggested in your introduction, at a real turning point that has been coming for 18 years. We all know that it's been coming. We've known it's been coming, so have colleges. What they've actually done about it is another question. But yeah, so I cover higher education, typically access, cost, and completion, and find that even now, as higher education has been getting greater scrutiny than it once did, we all used to sort of put higher education, I think, on kind of a moral high ground and not question it as much as has happened in the last 10 years. There's still a lot of things that surprise people about higher ed and that they don't know that can be of great benefit to them. And at the moment, as we're going to discuss in this episode, it's a buyer's market, for example.
I was going to ask you real quick, the scrutiny that you mentioned, where do you think that scrutiny comes from? Like, what's the source of that?
I think that there's a point at which you can't continue to give the kind of vague, non-responsive answers that higher education did to the question of why does it cost so much? Why are our outcomes and success rates so low? There's also been a significant, even as my industry, journalism, and I often say this to people in higher education, if there's an industry in worse shape than higher ed, it's journalism. But even with the deterioration of journalism and the decline in the number of journalists who cover lots of other topics, there's been a lot of foundation support for nonprofit journalism like ours to cover education and higher education as people understand how vitally important this is to our economy, to individual success. So those things have all kind of propelled a lot more scrutiny of higher education than it used to get. I think also you saw during the 2010s scandals and payouts and golden parachutes and administrative hiring and a lot of other things that after a while people couldn't ignore. And that began to get a lot of coverage.
I love, though, that you pointed out that journalists might be the one group that have not been consistently disappointed by higher education, benefits from all of this. You know, speaking of journalism, you wrote a fantastic article about the title is, and the title tells the story. The number of 18-year-olds is about to drop sharply, packing a wallop for colleges and the economy. Mm-hmm. This is the demographic cliff, isn't it, Jon?
We've been waiting for this since the Great Recession. And the simple reason that it's happening is that people stop having children in economic downturns. So if, happy anniversary, it's 18 years now since the Great Recession. But the birth rate never recovered. There was a tiny blip in 2021, like really small increase in fertility rates, but it's been down every single year. People just aren't having kids. And so that's a problem in a lot of ways, including for colleges who need those kids.
Right.
That's their customers. And that so the high school class now in who are now seniors is the last big high school class. And so for colleges at the end of this new year, when they begin recruiting for the next class of incoming freshmen, that's when this hits. And it goes on and on and on. Not only is there now projected to be a demographic cliff, there's now a second demographic cliff projected to begin in 2033 when there had been hopes of a rebound. There's very little hope now for a rebound. We'll have about 650,000 fewer 18-year-olds per year. That's a 15% decline over the current supply. And when you compound that over 13 years, that's a lot fewer people.
It's so interesting because obviously Mike and I have dealt with students, these kids that are now the number are declining for a long time. And I think the first time that I sort of really knew about it was probably back in maybe 2019. And Mike and I podcasted about it in early 2020, right before COVID. So it's been interesting because my understanding is that COVID sort of might have forestalled some problems for colleges and universities that maybe we were hopeful in 2020 that maybe some colleges would regroup and maybe really start to take this impending demographic cliff more seriously. But what have you observed, or what do you know about what colleges have done to really prepare for this decline? Because as you're saying, we've known it's coming because we know when the babies aren't here, they're not going to be here in 18 years. But what are colleges doing, or what have they done to sort of deal with this?
Well, my flip answer to that question is they're closing. I mean, there's
they've done nothing.
I haven't seen much. I will tell you that 18-year-olds are not the only market for colleges and universities. But before I go to that, let me pick up on one really important thing you said. COVID was sort of a salvation for colleges in another way. They got billions of dollars
money. There was money there
of emergency
100%,
funding.
right.
And so that actually forestalled the crisis. And then you saw last year, you saw more than a college a week closing in the first half of last year because they ran out of that money. And so, now the money's gone, the students are beginning to disappear. The number of students is beginning to decline. I have not seen a lot of effort by colleges. There's one growth area among high school students, and that's among Hispanic high school students. But colleges generally have not proven very good at recruiting Hispanic students. So college going among Hispanic students is low. Hispanic students also empirically tend to go to institutions near where they live, and they tend to be averse to debt. So one thing that they can do, and that we're going to write about, some of them are doing, is going after that market of Hispanic high school, 18-year-old Hispanic high school graduates.
And that was what I was going to mention. Obviously there's been a real push over probably the last 5 years for sure to get more underserved populations into colleges. We've certainly seen those trends at a lot of the really selective ones. Do you think that's part of this? Because obviously a Hispanic population will often fall into that category. I'm kind of speaking a little cynically here, but I'm wondering if obviously they see that this is the market that we can try to bring them into institutions.
I think they see that this is the market. I don't know that they've yet come up with a way of attracting these students, because Hispanic students also tend to be concentrated in places that the demographic cliff is worst in the birth rates are lowest in the Northeast and the Midwest, where we've already seen years of significant enrollment decline. What they need to do in those regions is to draw Hispanic students from the South and Southwest. And that's a supply of customers that does not want to go to that far away from where they live. So there are huge challenges. There are a few Hispanic serving institutions. Mostly they are in those areas where Hispanic students live already. There are also some in places like the Pacific Northwest that are doing things like hiring Spanish-speaking admissions counselors. It's a small step, and I'm not sure it's enough to forestall what's coming.
Didn't I hear that schools like NYU have started to set up satellite campuses in certain Latin countries?
I'm not sure about certain Latin countries, but some really forward-thinking colleges and universities that are very innovative. And sometimes when you cover higher education, college and innovative seem like an oxymoron. They have set up campuses in underserved areas. So the one that I know best is Northeastern University, which has set up campuses in areas like Charlotte, which has grown its sort of base of corporate. There's a lot of corporate headquarters in Charlotte, but not a lot of higher education. So Northeastern opened a campus there, opened a campus in Vancouver, opened a campus in Silicon Valley. A university in Hawaii opened a campus in to teach, I think it's physical therapy and a few other programs in Las Vegas, which is a big growth market for those fields, but doesn't have a lot of local higher education supply. So that's one solution. But those are all of these things we're talking about are nibbling at the edges. Though to your point, Amy, what they do see as alternative markets are three: international students, graduate students, and older than traditional age students. And all of those things don't look particularly hopeful.
Well, certainly COVID diminished the amount of international students coming. So that particular group, at least for a while, that was a compromised group because of COVID, right?
But even before COVID, in the first Trump administration, the number of international students declined by 12%. And
Absolutely.
surveys suggest that prospective international students, there are recruiting organizations that have surveyed prospective students about their willingness to come to the United States in a second Trump administration, and a lot of them don't want to come here. We're also facing intensifying competition from particularly three other countries, the UK, Canada, and Australia, which not only are going after the same international students we are, but they are letting them stay. So they educate these students and they invite them to stay. What we do is we bring the brightest students in the world to our country, train them at the greatest universities on the planet, and then make them leave and go home and compete against us.
Right.
That doesn't make a lot of sense. So all of those things are hurting international numbers. Graduate education is an area that universities have used to increase their revenue. Um, Unlike undergraduate students, graduate students can borrow an unlimited amount of money. That actually is an interesting proposal of some of the incoming Trump administration policy people to limit the amount of money that graduate students can borrow, because a lot of the student loan debt issue is for graduate and professional schools, not for undergraduate education. So that could cut into the graduate school market. But even now, even though you'll hear colleges and universities talk about how graduate education is growing, if you look more closely, it's growing because of international students, that very fragile, vulnerable market. The number of domestic graduate students is not increasing. The other problem with international students is that China was the number one sending country, and because of geopolitical issues, that flow has slowed down. So the number one sending country now is India. Both India and China are building a ton of new universities. They're on a building spree to educate their students without having them leave. All of those things are a big problem for American universities and colleges. And let me just briefly talk about the two other markets. The one other market, older than traditional age students. Colleges and universities are aggressively recruiting those students, but they're doing a terrible job at supporting them. So if you think about it, there's 44 million Americans that started college but never finished. That seems like a really promising pool of prospective customers if you can get them to come back. But think about who they are. They're really angry. They left college for a reason. They owe debt and never got a credential. So you have 44 million unhappy customers that you're trying to get to come back, on top of which colleges generally have not been very good at supporting those students, many of whom have jobs, they have families. The number of daycare slots at colleges and universities is actually declining. So they're not doing a particularly thoughtful job of supporting those students. Their office is financial aid, the registrar, they're not open when those students can come to the campus. The classes aren't taught when those people can take them. So there are other ways that colleges can dig themselves out of this hole, but they're not doing a particularly good job yet of using them.
Well, what you describe is analogous to certain large companies that don't focus on customer service because their marketing is so strong that there's always a batch of customers coming behind. So a lot of
The
people leave, they
pipeline
don't
is
have great
there.
experiences, but it doesn't matter if that the front end of the funnel is wide enough. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of pain that's going around. Are there any schools in your estimation that will remain somewhat imperturbable by this trend?
Yes. I mean, the schools that are at risk are small, small private nonprofit, liberal arts, single
Right.
gender, religiously affiliated,
Expensive because they're private.
tuition dependent because they don't have large endowments. That's who we're seeing close. We're going to see more of them close. That's really sad because those institutions are really important in the overall kind of ecosystem of higher ed. Religious institutions, for example, tend to educate lower income students or students who might not feel comfortable at a larger, for example, public university. So those are the ones that are closing. Now, having said that, people don't think public universities and colleges can close. They can, and they are. And I've just written about this in many states. Public colleges and universities are merging, closing campuses, increasingly shutting down majors, not just one or two of them, but 24 or 30. And those are typically in rural places, which already have an undersupply of colleges and universities. So there's a really lopsided impact here. Harvard isn't going to close. University of Michigan isn't going to close, but a lot of other colleges that do important work will close. There's just too many of them.
Which makes it really tricky for students right now because if you're looking at, let's say you're in high school and you're looking at some of these smaller liberal arts or religiously affiliated schools, there's a potential that you could end up at an institution that once you arrive on campus, all of a sudden, like you're suggesting, either they no longer have the major that brought you there, or they don't have the programs that brought you there, or the worst of the worst, of course, is they close and now here you are having to figure out now, what am I going to do? Which is a really, really scary thought for those students looking at colleges right now. That how do you to ensure that the place you end up is actually going to be there for you when you actually want to graduate in 4 years.
The parents and the students listening to you need to ask that question. And we're hearing, by the way, I was at a campus actually a couple of years ago and heard from a tour guide that for the first time visiting parents and students were asking, will this college be around in 4 years? That's a mind-blowing question. But it's a really important one to ask. And there are ways to find out if a college is going to close. Their financials are public. They won't give them to you, and they also will not give you a straight answer to that question.
Of
Some
course not.
colleges that some colleges that have closed were recruiting students up to the hour before they closed.
Right.
And you know what that does? That means that students have committed to that institution, turned down acceptances from other institution, and now they're out of luck. And the other thing that's crazy, because colleges and universities, no one should be laboring under the impression that they have your best interest at heart. They have their best interest at heart. They have their self-interest at heart. And so we've talked to students that went to a college that closed, and it's very unusual. There's research about this. It's very unusual for those students to ever finish their education, but some of them did transfer. There are teach out colleges. So a college that's closing will typically make an arrangement with another college to take their students.
That's what we saw in Cleveland. We had a school that meets the exact profile you're describing, where that was exactly what was happening for that institution.
And then they'll transfer to the teach out institution, and then that institution will close. We've talked to students that have been at more than one college that has closed.
That's so painful.
The likelihood that they'll ever graduate, the likelihood that all their credits will transfer, really very, very low. And we're just like, there's no protection for those students.
Jon, when you say that that consumers, because that's what we really are in this context, can look into the financial health of a school, is there a centralized location where that's information? You have to dig into each school's filings.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Nope, there's the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education keeps a list of colleges that meet certain financial or fail to meet certain financial standards. It's really hard to understand it. It uses sort of a calculation that brings you to a number that if the number is below this, it's in trouble. If it's above this, it's not in trouble. It also lags real time substantially, as most
Right.
federal data on higher education does. The more helpful means of looking at this is that anyone can look at, even though they're not for profit, private colleges have to file a tax return. It's called a Form 990. And the other, our fellow nonprofit, ProPublica, another journalism nonprofit, ProPublica collects these and puts them on the website, on its website for free, which is propublica.org. And you can look up the name of your college, click on the Form 990. They also have to publish a financial audit, and get a sense right on the first page. It's a long, complicated, as anyone that's filed an individual tax return, just imagine how much more complicated it is for a complex organization like a college. But right on the first page, you can see income and expenses. And if you go back and you can find on this website several years of these Form 990s, I was looking at a college the other day that, except for 1 year, has had $20 million deficits per year.
That does not sound good.
It is not good. That college probably will survive because it has an active base of alumni who won't let it fail, but you can't continue to do business that way. And if I'm a parent, I'd be wary of sending my kid to that college.
We've spoken about how this affects the schools. Let's end on a high note by talking about the potential advantage for future applicants. Say I'm a parent of a student in the class of 2027, 2028. What's the silver lining here?
Yeah, good news for you. Tuition, and you're not hearing this wrong, tuition is going down. Like, when has that ever happened?
Ever happened? Never.
When adjusted for inflation, tuition is going down because it's supply and demand. Now, having said that, I want to be very clear that tuition is still very expensive, number one. And for that minority of students, maybe more of a majority of your listeners, but a minority of students actually attend a residential university or college, live on campus. Most people don't. Most people commute. But if they do live on campus, the price of dorms and dining has gone up far in excess of inflation. And so, because universities, I think a lot of consumers think that universities break even on dorms and dining. This is a really important, an increasingly important revenue source for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so to continue to have some revenue coming in, they have increased the cost of living at and eating at the campus. So that is the real driver of the increase in college, but tuition's going down. The other good news for applicants is that it's easier to get in. In the last 10 years, the proportion of applicants who are accepted has gone up 7.6 percentage points. Not at Harvard, not at Stanford. Those are still single digit acceptance rates, but overall, not including open access institutions that take everybody, overall, the acceptance rate is 76% of students who apply get in. There's a mythology in this country that it's impossible to get into college, and colleges have pushed that narrative because it serves them.
Well, exclusivity sells, right? I mean, essentially.
Exclusivity sells. And so, but it isn't true. It's harder to attract students. They might say, and this is a really important nuance, they might say they had a record number of applications, but that doesn't mean there's a record number of applicants because, again, as you know, more individual applicants are sending in more applications. So there's a lot of paperwork flying through the ether, but the actual number of students is down. That puts you in the driver's seat. It's a buyer's market. Not only does it mean it's easier to get in, not only does it mean the tuition is going down, it means really crucially that you can negotiate for more financial aid because they need you more than you need them.
Yeah. Buyer's market benefits consumer, right?
This is fantastic, Jon. Obviously, we would love to speak with you all day about this. I think there's a lot more to unpack. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can reach me at jmarcus@heckingerreport.org. I'm on X and Bluesky, same handle in both places, Jon Marcus Boston. And yeah, check out our work at Hechinger Report, all one word.org, and click on higher education. And you'll see a lot of this information, including something that we call tuition tracker, which tells you what you'll actually pay based on your income of your family to go to college. It will tell you about, our coverage will tell you about trends in higher ed. There's a financial aid offer decoder that helps you understand the financial aid offer, which colleges make purposely dense and indecipherable, and some other tools that might be helpful.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.